Now we're going to get a little bit into what you do, which is botany, correct?
Yes, I'm a plant ecologist.
Just making sure I wasn't completely off base with that one. Now, how critical is it? Because we have a lot of longleaf pine forests in Georgia and a lot of coastal areas that are kind of threatened due to construction. How critical is it for us as a society that we preserve as much of these ecosystems as possible? How bad do we really, really need these ecosystems?
Well, I can tell you this. Historically, we had 70 to 92 million acres of longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem, and right now we only have 3% of that remaining. So it is essentially gone. We have 1,000 acres in the state of Georgia of virgin longleaf pine that's never been cut. And that's about it in terms of virgin longleaf pine forests. So that ecosystem has been completely exploited and there is very little remaining. So it houses a tremendous amount of biodiversity, this particular ecosystem. There are up to 300 endangered species that live, federally threatened and endangered species that live in the longleaf pine forest. So it's critical to preserve that habitat in order to preserve that biodiversity.
Now, if I remember correctly from the seminar series that I took last semester, your research in the biology department is in endangered plant species, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, normally when someone says endangered species, the first thing that comes to your mind is, whales, pandas, tigers. Plants aren't usually the first thing to come to your mind, but you could make the argument that they're just as important, correct?
Absolutely.
So could you explain to someone who isn't necessarily an expert on the subject why a rare plant is just as important as a rare animal?
Well, all species are part of an ecosystem. They work together. They're interdependent. If you take one out, you don't know what the results are going to be. It's like the argument with the rivets on the plane. Which rivet are you willing to allow that plane to lose and then go and fly in that plane? Can you count on that plane still working like you want it to? So it's the same thing with an ecosystem. If we start pulling out these endangered species and allowing them to go extinct, we don't know what the consequences are going to be. Some of the species that I study, for example, hairy rattleweed, what a terrible name for an endangered plant. Hairy rattleweed only occurs in 2 counties in the state of Georgia, in the entire world, near Jessup, in Wayne and Brantley counties. It's a legume, which means that it fixes nitrogen in the soil. So it plays a critical role in that plant community. And without that species, there's a lot less nitrogen. So that's going to change the whole structure of that plant community. And that, in turn, will affect the animals. So every part is important.
What was the name of that species one more time?
Hairy rattleweed.
It just doesn't have the cute appeal of panda or...
We need to change its name to get some more charismatic support for that species, I'm afraid.
Recently, there have been discoveries in the Amazon of plants and fungal species that have just amazing chemical properties. Now, one of the ones that I actually had to do a paper on earlier this semester was actually able to break down plastic, like plastic water bottles that are filling up landfills in the ocean, and was actually able to break down the plastic into a usable material. Do you think that just adds a whole new dimension to, saving the rainforest and protecting ecosystems once these, once these big companies have a vested economic interest in keeping them around versus just plundering for resources?
Yeah, I think that rainforests are full of unknown resources to us. There are pharmaceuticals in those plants. There's just a storehouse of all kinds of solutions to problems that we are dealing with. And if we lose those species, then with them goes that information, that DNA, what the solutions to our problems. So yes, I do think that knowing that gives us a lot of incentive to make sure that those species are around and that those habitats stay around.
Now, a lot of rainforest has been lost due to agricultural development in lesser developed countries. What would you say to those countries? Because the people who are trying to farm the land in order to survive. Now, I get that the rainforest is important to us, but to people who have to decide between do I want to save the rainforest or do I want to eat today? There has to be a way for us to preserve the rainforest and make sure these people, can make a living for themselves.
Right. And we have to be fair. We have done a lot of destruction in our country with the resources that were once here. And that's the argument that some people make is that, well, we already did that here. Now we're telling other people they can't do it in their country. But there are incredible resources that need to be preserved. And we just have to figure out a way to help the people who are living there to live sustainably with their resources. And in fact, Native cultures already know how to do that. They have known how to do that, and some of that information has been lost through the years. So we need to go back and figure out how to make it work. It is possible to live sustainably. Of course, population growth is a huge issue. So the more people we have, the more resources we need, the more waste we produce, and the harder it is to live within our means on Earth.
Would you say that population growth, balancing the ability to try and grow as much food as possible today, basically, and the simultaneous need to continue being able to grow that food tomorrow in that ecosystem and not totally destroying the ecosystem, are you confident that we will be able to strike a balance between that yield and sustainability, but sort of between trying to accommodate for population growth and trying to accommodate for the generations afterwards?
I am confident. We are smart people. We have figured out solutions to just about everything that has stood in our way. And I know that we have the means to figure these kinds of things out too. There's some new ideas out there about urban farming. We see more and more concentration of people into cities, and people are now talking about high-rise farming in these in vertical farms and reusing water, recycling water, and basically having huge structures, vertical structures instead of horizontal structures to grow agriculture right in the middle of a city where people need it. These things are being tried and tested around the world, and there's some real promise there. So I think that we have the solutions close by, and we just need to focus our effort on developing those solutions.
Gives a whole new meaning to urban jungle.
Did you just pun? Did you just do that on our show? Yes. I'm proud of you. I am so proud of you. That kind of leads into our next question, though. Now, one of the new proposals that I've seen for major cities being greener is that turning the tops of buildings into, you said urban farming, more garden-like, just rooftops of regular buildings. With some people going so far as to propose that they reinforce certain rooftops so you could plant trees that would then grow to be full size on top of skyscrapers. And that would also attract species of bird that wouldn't usually inhabit the areas around major cities like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, where most of the natural flora has just, from that area, is just gone. There's almost, there's no trees there. What are the birds going to do? There's pigeons, and that's pretty. There's occasionally seagulls.
The rats of the air.
Yep. Now, do you think it'd be a good idea to reinstate that, where you could say, once the technology is up to speed, you could put solar panels on houses and put these types of urban farming and garden on top of larger buildings? How close do you think that gets us to almost carbon neutral buildings?
Well, okay, a couple things here. Number one, what you're talking about is green roofs. And the city of Chicago has done a fabulous job with this already. Lots of municipal buildings in the city of Chicago are covered in prairie species. I've seen footage of the mayor standing on top of the municipal building in a sea of grass. So one of the great things about green roofs is not necessarily the biodiversity that it provides, but it's actually the stormwater management, which is a huge issue in urban centers because there's no place for the water to go. When it rains, everything's covered in asphalt or buildings, and where does the water go? So it rushes into the storm drains, and all that toxic water ends up in the watershed. So, and the reason it's toxic is because it's filled with runoff from oils from the streets and toxins that are being produced and so forth. So it goes straight into the water straight into the watershed without being filtered out. So green roofs do a great job of managing some of that stormwater. So they're an excellent solution for that problem in big cities. Secondarily, they do a nice job of providing increased biodiversity. In Chicago, some of the species that they're using on the rooftops are prairie species, which would have been there in that city, in the area of that city prior to all those buildings being there. So they are trying to reintroduce some of that biodiversity. And once you put the plants in, then other things like the birds and insects and so forth are going to follow. So it's a great idea. There are some places that are more amenable to that type of idea than others. This part of Georgia, we've actually thought a little bit about trying to do that on our roofs here at Georgia Southern, but it turns out that you'd actually have to irrigate the roofs here. And if you're putting water on a roof on purpose, that's probably not the best idea. So here, instead of green roofs, what we've done is white roofs. And I don't know if you've heard about this, but we've actually insulated our roofs, all of our flat roofs on campus. I think there's 13 buildings that have a flat roof on campus that we have changed out the black roof, which absorbs heat and heats up the building and
makes it more expensive to cool the building.
Exactly. So instead, we're putting reflective surfaces on there with a thick layer of insulation on the roof, and it's making a huge difference in terms of the energy efficiency of the building. So just changing the color of the building, or the roof of the building does that. Green roofs do the same thing.